Welcome back. I've been meaning to make this video for a while, but I immediately got sick as soon as I wrote down all of my ideas, and my voice just wasn't there. It's still kind of recovering right now, so bear with me. We are going to talk about Clerks 3. Very rarely have I tried as hard as I tried with this film to avoid any kind of spoilers. I didn't want to know anything about it other than what was in the trailer. So I basically unfollowed everything on any sort of social media that could have spoiled anything. And I'm really glad that I took this approach because this movie shocked the out of me on several occasions. I'll go ahead and get this out of the way now. If you've ever really been a fan of anything Kevin Smith has made, you're probably going to find something that you enjoy in this film. But don't be expecting anything that really feels like the other two Clerks films, because this really doesn't. No matter how hard it tries to replicate the first film, it's really, really hollow. And that's unfortunately something I can say for Jay and Silent Bob reboot, and basically anything Kevin Smith has done since Scott Mosier moved on and doesn't work with him. These movies kind of, there's some sort of amateur quality to them that's almost endearing, but not in the same way that it was with Clerks. You would think that somebody with this many years in the game would be able to make films that look better than this, but I felt the same way with the Jay and Silent Bob reboot. Some of the shots do not look good. It looks like iPhone footage. The colors are off. I don't know if it's the makeup. I don't know if it's the lighting. I mean, if you've ever watched my videos, like, I very much do not have an expert understanding of lighting or basically any sort of filmography, but there's just something about these last two films that feels really, really amateur, and as I said, it's not really endearing like it used to be. I think the acting in this film is alright. I mean, it's a Kevin Smith film, it's only going to be so good, but it's not bad. However, there were a lot of times in this film that I really felt like we were watching something that had to be the first take. There had to be an alternate delivery of some of these lines somewhere that maybe were forgotten about or just weren't used. There were some times in this movie I just could not believe that, again, as I said earlier, somebody with this many years in this industry could make something that just feels so I'm sorry to say it. And to piggyback earlier when I was talking about Jay and Silent Bob reboot, Kevin Smith has really been into this sort of meta stuff ever since Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back came out in 2001, I believe. That was filled with references to his earlier films, but it was kind of earnest then. There was something to it that, yeah, it was sort of cheesy, but it was still endearing. I mean, I know I've been using that word a lot, but there's a certain charm to the earlier View Askewniverse stuff that's just not there anymore. And I don't know if it's just me getting older or if it's the actors getting older and they're just not as tied to these roles anymore. It's probably a combination of the two, but also Kevin Smith is just going nuts with the meta shit in his last few films, and while I do enjoy some of the references, some of it is just so overboard, particularly in reboot. But we're here to talk about Clerks 3, so there are a lot of parts of this movie that just kind of feel like Kevin Smith blowing himself. But with that said, I loved this movie overall. I watched it like 3 times in a row. First of all, which should be obvious because this is a movie review, spoiler alert if you haven't seen this movie, go watch it. It's worth your time if you're a fan of Kevin Smith movies. If you're not, or if you never really cared about him to begin with, I would recommend it just based on the story and kind of what it's trying to say, because I very much agree with and identify with, clock is ticking, better chase your dreams, which is something I've done in my personal life recently, because if I was to die now, nobody would ever hear my music, and I'm not cool with that. So I really resonated with the message of this film. But I want to talk about the weaknesses first. I've basically already been shitting on the movie for however long this segment is after cutting and editing, so let's talk about the bad stuff first. And to be honest with you, the things I think are weak also kind of have strengths to them, if that makes any sense. Like, for example, I really kind of think it's weak that this movie is them making the first movie, and there are some cheap methods that they go to pull at your heartstrings. One of the first things that you learn in this film is that Becky, who was pregnant, was killed. In case you need a refresher, Becky, or Rosario Dawson's character, actually marries Dante at the end of Clerks 2, and you see her very, very pregnant working on the quick stop, if I remember correctly. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but right off the bat, you see something referencing her funeral or whatever it was that was taped to the side of the cash register. I honestly think that this also pays off, which we'll get to in a moment, but one thing I really, really, really hated when I watched this movie was, spoiler alert, I'll give you a second here to click away. All right, final warning. I'm not going to do this again. No more spoiler alerts. 3, 2. Before Dante dies, he actually borrows a lot of money from Emma. If you remember Emma from the last film, it's the woman he was supposed to move to Florida with, and he ended up cheating on with Rosario Dawson's character. He borrows, I believe it's $10,000 from her, and puts up his half of the quick stop as collateral. He's borrowing this money only for Randall's movie, and he actually tells her that it's something to do with Randall's heart attack. So he goes pretty much above and beyond and finds this money, even if it means that he could lose everything. So that didn't bother me as bad because I thought it was like a good token of how much he valued Randall, but the ending sucks in this regard because guess what happens? Well, there needs to be money so that, you know, the plot can satisfy fans, just like at the end of Clerks 2 when Jay and Silent Bob decided they would just fork over thousands of dollars to these two guys that have kind of always treated them like shit, honestly. Magically, Blockchain Coltrane, which is the dumbest character name I've ever heard in my life, and he's actually, this kid's not an actor, he's actually dating Harley Quinn Smith in real life, and that's how he got the part. I guess that's why he doesn't talk. But point is, him and Elias make a lot of money with their Jesus kites. Yeah, so magically, just because there needed to be a bunch of money, there's a bunch of cash right there that just gets handed to Randall in the perfect moment so that he can buy the quick stop. Because we haven't seen all of this before. In way better movies, honestly. So as I said earlier, I did enjoy this film and I watched it several times, and here are some of my favorite things. The illegal weed sale right outside of the actual, like, legal weed dispensary was fucking hilarious. I really thought that was an interesting concept, and I really like Jason Mewes. I'm really glad that he's been able to keep himself clean for, I believe, somewhere around a decade now. Honestly, as Jay, he's amazing. He's the same as he always was, even though he looks different. It's awesome. I think that Elias becoming like more and more satanic is hilarious. The Lord Holy Ghosted Me is one of the funniest jokes in this entire fucking movie. I cracked up so hard I had to pause the movie when I heard that for the first time. With that said though, there are parts of that joke that just, when he's literally like freaking out in the hospital after Randall had his heart attack and he's like, I have to Satan. Kevin Smith has this habit where his jokes can be kind of really funny sometimes, but then they go on like one line too far. There's like one element added to the joke that ruins everything before it. Anyway, back to Elias. He is delightfully campy, and I think his name's like Trevor Furman or something. This guy's actually not an actor. His last thing was Clerks 2, so that's actually kind of a cool thing to think about in my opinion. Another thing I love about the movie is all of the returning actors. A lot of the people from the first movie are actually here, which is amazing considering that was 30 years ago, and so many of these people are alive and kicking, and honestly, a lot of them look really healthy and happy. Even as someone who's never met and will never meet any of these people, it was good to see them back. It was just a good, warm kind of feeling, which it's nostalgia pandering, so that's exactly what he was going for. My favorite people in this movie are Rosario Dawson and Jeff Anderson. Jeff Anderson kills it in this movie. I really think he did a great job exemplifying everything that he was supposed to, being cocky and selfish, and then as soon as his world gets flipped upside down, you really see it in his face. Even though more of the actual acting was written for Dante in this film, I really think that Randall steals the show the entire time. That is no shade to Dante though. Some of his scenes are heartbreaking. The theater scene is what you see from Dante's perspective once he has had his own heart attack, which happens later. And this is representative of another part of the film that I absolutely adore. While everyone's alive and well and everything looks like it's on the up and up and the film is being made originally, Randall's kind of an asshole about it because, you know, it's Randall. He is a self-centered douchebag, even if he does mean well ultimately. When they're making the film and all of his friends are just kind of hanging out with him and also working on the movie, it's all Randall scenes. It's all the parts where he gets to be the cool guy or the asshole or verbally eviscerate his friends, like the scene where Dante actually has his heart attack, the salsa shark scene where he's basically saying like, you need to shit or get off the pot to Dante. And in real life, this is actually what causes Dante to snap because they had just had a very vicious argument in the cooler right before that, and Dante even says, like, I'm not supposed to be here today before he has his heart attack, which Jeff Anderson doesn't take seriously at first, because he's like, he even says in the film, well, I had a heart attack and I'm just fine. And that's what makes Elias tell Randall, like, look, you're wrong about this. This guy put up his half of the store to get this fucking money for you, and you're being a... After that happens, Randall gets kicked out of the hospital by security. He won't get away from Dante on the stretcher while they're trying to take him to the operating room to save his life. So basically, he gets kicked out, so he races back to go start working on his film. And then he sneaks into with the help of Jay and Silent Bob, I think, he sneaks into the hospital to show it to Dante and to tell him, you know, you've always been the main character in my story. And that's really touching, because everything we see referencing the old film is all Dante scenes from then on. I really appreciated that touch. So the point is, the theater scene, we're actually kind of seeing Dante die. He's in the theater we've seen him interact with Rosario Dawson earlier, and honestly, I meant to mention this earlier, but I forgot to write it down in my notes. The scene in the graveyard where they don't even really mention the baby, and she's talking about going to mouth with like a bunch of dead celebrities, is so fucking stupid. It was actually a really funny part of Clerks 2, especially the way that it was set up. It's almost like a Beastie Boys song, where it was like one person says one line and immediately another person responds with something very similar. And do you go ass to mouth? You never go ass to mouth. You never go ass to mouth. You've never gone ass to mouth. Like, that was really funny, but you're throwing it in a touching scene where he's communicating with his dead wife who died pregnant with his child. It's just stupid. It doesn't land. This, on the other hand, completely redeems that, in my opinion. It's sad. I actually cried during the scene, I'm not gonna lie. And also, I believe it was kind of deliberate that Dante is actually seeing his own memories, I think, because when we saw the black and white scenes earlier, we were very clearly seeing them, you know, it was the older versions of these characters acting. The part where Rosario says, don't you want to see how the story ends? And Dante says, I trust the director, and they leave the theater, and then he dies in real life. Man, that was a very well-made scene. Like, that right there kind of made up for all the other stuff in the film that I thought, honestly, either wasn't good or just outright sucked. I really liked that it seemed like Dante had actually been able to, before he died, he was able to kind of make peace with some of these things that he very clearly was not enjoying about this film. I did kind of want to shed some light on something I noticed, that I actually watched a couple other reviews just to kind of see what the consensus was, and, you know, there were a lot of people that felt like it was kind of cheap that the baby and wife had to die, and that was one of the first things that you saw, but Kevin Smith actually straight up admitted in one of his panels that that happened because it was hard to get Rosario Dawson. But I think that that also kind of plays into the film, because it kind of shows the unfair nature of, you know, time and the way that this stuff can happen to people. Anyone can have a heart attack at any time. You could die in a car accident. I mean, luck is a big part of your life, whether you want to admit that or not, and it could happen to anyone at any time, and it's not really fair. All of this stuff happening to Dante, who was the considerate person who, you know, he kind of did things the right way, I guess, in the sense that he lived his life in a way where he wasn't actively trying to screw people over. He did some shit that he shouldn't have, you know, cheating on his fiance and getting his boss pregnant and whatever, but at the heart of Dante was always a good man, it seemed like. And Randall is the selfish who doesn't give a shit about anybody, survives his heart attack with basically no complications while Dante dies from his. Dante was always a bit more considerate, seemed to be like a more likable person overall, not a more likable character in the film necessarily, but if you were to meet Dante and Randall in real life, I think you'd probably get a significant amount more enjoyment out of interacting with Dante than you would with Randall. I think that that kind of adds to the heartbreak in a non-cheap way. Like, yeah, you can say that it's cheap that Becky dying was put there to make you feel bad, but at the same time, I think it also served the purpose of, like, even if you try to stay on the up and up, and even if you do things the traditionally right way or whatever, this can still happen to you. And there's really no linearity about it. So my verdict is, this is a messy film. It's kind of amateur looking, but I mean, to be honest with you, I really do enjoy it. I don't like this one anywhere near as much as I like Kevin Smith's earlier work, and to be honest with you, I don't think I'm really interested to know where anything goes from here. I think I'm about checked out on the View Askewniverse, to be honest with you, because Reboot was so hollow, had a couple good moments, but it was literally just, hey, do you remember this? Hey, do you remember this? Hey, do you remember this? That kind of worked for a moment, just seems way too hard, like someone's dad is trying to be edgy. And it seems that way because that's exactly what it is. But with that said, honestly, seeing Dante and Randall back on screen again, and seeing Jay and Silent Bob, and kind of getting to see some of the difficulties that they actually went through when they were making the first film, it was a pretty interesting idea. But the saving grace to me is the message, and this is even something that I say, my motto is, if you aren't where you want to be, then you don't have downtime. Kind of sort of is like a parallel statement in a way, because he's saying you might not have as much time as you think you do, so you need to get out there and do whatever this thing is you want to make. Do this thing, this dream, whatever it is, you need to get out there and chase it. That message and the theater scene completely redeemed the things I did not like about this film. So with that said, thank you for watching.